Awesome. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the New York State Network for Youth Successes Power of Three After School Advocacy webinar series. So my name is Gabby Schwartz. I am the policy coordinator here at the New York State Network for Youth Success. I really want to thank you all for joining us today to kick off the New York State budget season. I do want to let everyone know, as you probably heard when you entered, that this session will be recorded today. I also want to know a little bit about who we have in the room. So if you could just take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat box, that would be wonderful. So I get a look at who we have joining us today. Just take a quick minute, introduce yourself, and I'm going to keep moving through. So I want to note that today that the training does not count toward OCFS credit. So if you're here for OCFS credit, unfortunately, this session does not count for it. I wanted to be upfront with y'all about that. So today we're going to talk about the budget season in New York State. Specifically where we are in the budget process, when we can expect to see budget priorities from decision makers, including legislators and the governor. We also are going to explore what the network has heard from decision makers related to after school, including what their interests are as we kick off the budget season. Finally, we're going to review the network's fiscal year 25-26 state budget asks. Also, thank you all for introducing yourselves in the chat. I see you all doing that for me. Looks like we have folks from a bunch of different organizations joining us today and across the state, which is really nice to see. So again, thank you all for being here. So throughout the presentation today, we're going to talk about what advocates are doing during each phase of the budget season and how you and your organization can be involved in those efforts. Typically, when advocates and legislators talk about the budget season, they're referring to January to April. So the season we're in right now, hence our kickoff. Before we begin, I want to take a quick minute to introduce who we are and what the Power of Three campaign is. The Network for Youth Success is the statewide after-school network for New York. We work with 49 other state after-school networks and the National After-School Alliance. We're committed to strengthening the capacity and commitment of communities, programs, and professionals to increase access to high-quality programs and services beyond the traditional classroom. We are also the state affiliate for the National After-School Association, the New York State lead for the National Girls Collaborative Project, and also the backbone agency for the New York State Community Schools Network. This webinar series is part of our Power of Three campaign, which is a public awareness campaign on the role, benefits, and impact of after school. The goal of this webinar series is to give you insight into the world of advocacy and to empower you to advocate on behalf of summer after school and expanded learning programs in the families in your community. You can learn a little bit more about the Power of Three campaign on our webpage, which I'm going to share in the chat box right now for everyone. So if you're curious about this, it also has all the recordings for our other sessions on there. So go ahead and take a look. Feel free to explore, has all sorts of good resources on there. We're going to start today by reviewing the New York State budget cycle. So kind of an overview of what the budget looks like and how it functions. There are 4 major stages to the budget process in New York. Guiding the process and stages is the state's fiscal year, which runs from April 1st to March 31st of each year. The first stage of the budget process is from June to September, and it's the agency budget preparation stage. During this stage, agency heads receive a call letter from the budget director that outlines the governor's priorities for the coming year. Agencies then begin to analyze and prepare a request for their agency and its programs to present to the budget office. So they get that call letter, they put together a budget, and then they present that back to the budget office. The agency heads submit those budget requests to the division of the budget in the fall, which are examined by that budget office, who use these requests to decide on different funding levels for the state budget, what they can accommodate, and what kind of recommendations they should provide to the governor's office by December. So they are informed by what the agencies say that they need, and then they fit that into the amount of money that the governor is looking to spend for the year. The governor's office considers these recommendations from the state agencies and then adopts some of them into the executive budget proposal, which is presented near the end of January. So we're expecting to see that actually today. So keep on the lookout for that. We do expect the executive budget proposal to drop today. Before the governor releases their executive budget proposals, they have to hold the State of the State address, which happened last week, and they will also release their State of the State briefing book. These are both ways for the governor to publicly discuss their agenda and focus for the next year. As I mentioned, the governor already did this. That was last Tuesday. She released both of them. We're going to share a link to the briefing book in the chat box for your reference. But as I noted, the executive budget is about to drop. So we have this, which has more wide perspective about her priorities. And then the budget proposal will actually have numbers associated with that, so we can really see what it looks like. So after receiving the executive proposal in January, the legislature analyzes the governor's proposal, and then they usually host public budget hearings on a majority of programs and they negotiate to reach an agreement between themselves and the governor's office. At these public hearings, the public, often including nonprofits and individuals, submit testimony on different issue areas verbally and in writing. The Assembly and State Senate are beginning to schedule public hearings, with some posted as of today. We recommend checking out the links that we're going to share in the chat box for hearings if you're potentially interested in participating. So again, they're about a different wide range of topics. Here is the one for the Assembly, and then I will pull the State Senate one as well, for if you'd like to be participatory in those. So oftentimes the legislature will release their one-house proposals, which outline, they do that usually around early March. So leadership in the legislature and the governor will negotiate to reconcile their visions for the budget. Then they vote on a series of legislation that creates that full budget proposal. So to be on time, the budget must be passed by the legislature and governor by the last day of the fiscal year, which is March 31st. There are times when the budget is not passed by the deadline. This is often due to challenges in negotiation between leadership, and we've seen that happen in the last few years. So there is a deadline, but we do often see it occasionally be late. This really depends on who's in leadership, what their priorities are, if they really are prioritizing an on-time budget. Some governors are really specific about that, and others are a little more willing to have it be a little bit late. So the state agencies then execute the budget as it's passed by the governor and the legislature between April 1st and March 31st, which constitutes New York's budget fiscal year. So to pass, the state budget is required to be balanced. Per New York's constitution, the state cannot borrow to cover budget deficits like the federal government can. So New York State doesn't have budget deficits that they cover with debt like the federal government. We hear that all the time, the federal debt. New York State doesn't have that. We are currently at the beginning of the budget season and in the legislative action phase that was on that graph from the last slide. As we noted earlier, we expect the governor to release her executive budget today, so it should be out probably by the end of this webinar. The network puts together an executive budget proposal analysis each year following the release, where we review the governor's proposals that relate to after-school, summer, and expanded learning programs. So we encourage you to sign up for our Power 3 listserv because that's where we are going to drop that once we put that analysis together. We do need a little bit of time after the executive budget drops to get that, but we will put that together and share that in our listserv if you want to sign up for that to be aware. As advocates, there are a lot of different actions that the network participates in throughout the year to prepare for the budget season. So June through September and October is really our slower season as agencies are working on developing their budgets, as we mentioned before. During this time, we're often building relationships with decision makers, which includes the governor's office, legislators, and state agency heads. This is often when we plan site visits for decision makers to see after school in action. Around this time, we also collect information from the after school field about their current pressing concerns to develop our budget priorities. These priorities tend to change as we have more conversations, but they're always informed by surveys from the after school field and input from our partner organizations that provide after school. If you want to participate, we really encourage you to sign up again for our Power 3 listserv. It's the one I'm going to keep pushing out every time because it's where we share a lot of our policy information. But when we do that priority survey, when we're doing that to inform our budget priorities are going to be, we send out a survey through that listserv primarily. That's where you're going to see it if you want to participate. So I dropped the link in the chat a minute ago. I'll drop it one more time just so that anyone who just joined is still able to access it. That is right there. So feel free to sign up for that. That's where we're going to drop that. So beginning in September and October and until December, we start ramping up our direct advocacy efforts. This is through meeting directly with decision makers to share information about our after-school priorities and the importance of those legislators supporting after-school in the budget and in legislation. We'll share our priorities with these offices. We also ask them if there are areas where we can partner with them to accomplish goals that they might have. So interest areas that they have that we might be able to support them with, or if they're really looking at doing it after school, they can talk to us and we can be a resource for them with data, information, what the field is saying, so that when they put legislation forth, they are doing things that make sense for the after school field. In October, the network also participates in the National Lights On After School celebration. So Lights On is a celebration of after-school programs with the goal of shining a light on after school to show the benefits they bring to our communities. Lights On is a really great opportunity to invite decision makers directly to your program. I'm going to drop a link in the chat to the Lights On webpage now. We really encourage you to check that out because they have a lot of ideas about different programs or celebrations. There's things as big as block parties that are big celebrations that some organizations do, or like marches, and some orgs just do some smaller stuff like social media advocacy, or they have the kids decorate light bulbs and show why they love after school. So there's really a very wide range of ways you can participate in Lights On, and all of it's very helpful for achieving that goal of shining a light, right, on after school. Dropping that link in the chat again for you all for Lights On. So moving along, in January, that's when like the official budget season as we talk about it begins. So during this time, we're going to plan advocacy activities to engage advocates, including after-school professionals, youth, and families. This can include legislative meetings, advocacy days, or social media campaigns. The goal of these activities is really to show decision makers the benefits and value of after-school programs in their districts, so they get an understanding about what after-school does, why we need to fund it, why it's important. Each year, we also submit testimony at public hearings relevant to after school, and generally communicate the importance of funding after school in the final state budget. This can look a lot like hosting call-in days with sample scripts for advocates. So we'll ask folks, hey, here's a script, you can adapt it however you want. We just want to give you a basis. Please call your legislator and tell them why after school matters to you. We also set up sign-on letters to show how many organizations and individuals are supportive of after school in the budget. So this will look like a letter where we say after school is super important, and then we ask advocates to sign on to say, I agree, after school is very important. Here are the ways that we can fund it. So they know that it's not just us as one voice speaking, it's a large group of people speaking. We also engage in legislative advocacy. This webinar focuses less on that aspect. However, from January to June, legislators are introducing and voting on legislation, which will implement laws on different issue areas. So as advocates, we'll give legislators our perspective on legislation that they're pushing and that they introduce, and share with our partners if we're interested in getting it to pass. So again, with those sign-on letters, call-in days to say like, this legislation is really important for the after-school field, please pass it, or we don't have to do this very often, but we don't really love this legislation. Maybe this isn't one that's going to be the most helpful for the after-school field. So if you want to be involved in these efforts or continue to be aware of opportunities as they become available, we really encourage you again, I'm going to push it again, the Power 3 listserv that we shared in the chat earlier. That's really where the network shares all of our policy updates and also policy opportunities if you're interested in being involved. So now that we've reviewed the stages of the budget, we want to talk a little bit about where we know decision makers stand in terms of after school. So what are they saying? Where do they stand? What's the state of things right now? So as we mentioned before, Governor Hochul's State of the State address and her briefing book came out last week, not last year. They did last year as well, but last week. And they gave us some information about what her priorities are in after school and summer. Firstly, the governor introduced a proposal to support youth mental health in after school programs. The briefing book outlined that the governor wants to create a program connecting mental health resources to after-school programs, specifically by connecting licensed healthcare facilities to state-funded after-school programs. This would involve providing youth mental health first aid training to all state-funded after-school providers and a state partnership with the State University of New York or SUNY system to match social work graduate students with state-funded after-school. This proposal is in alignment with the focus that we've seen from the governor around youth mental health. She really outlined that a lot in her State of the State address, and it's been a main issue of concern for Governor Hochul's administration. Her administration is really focused on improving that youth mental health and is interested in leveraging the after-school system as a vehicle to address the mental health challenges that youth are currently facing. The governor also proposed support for summer work experience for high school students through the Department of Labor. This would involve a partnership between the Department of Labor, school districts, and businesses. This program would address staffing concerns for businesses while providing high school students with work experience over the summer. High school students would be recruited for summer work experience program in high demand fields, and participating businesses would receive a reimbursement for 50% of student stipends. So we want to level and just say that we currently have limited information about the implementation of these programs and how they would interface with the existing after-school system. We expect that there's going to be additional information in the executive budget, which again, we know is coming out really soon, probably right now, including any potential funding to implement these programs. Really, that'll give us more details about what this is really going to look like on the ground. On the legislative side, we've heard a slightly different perspective and slightly different concern from our legislators. The networks met with multiple legislative offices in the fall to gather what their perspective is on after school and to share our priorities with them. Legislators are generally interested in improving and strengthening the learning and enrichment after school program supports, or LEAPs, as many of you probably know it as, grant. Legislators want information about how the after-school landscape in New York changed as a result of the change from Advantage After School and Empire State After School programs into LEAPs. So they really want to know what happened, what changed, who's funded now, and who isn't. They specifically want to know about what new programs there are and which programs were previously state funded in their districts. And they want to know which providers previously had funding and who has it now. So they want to know where that funding went, how it changed, how it moved. If you're interested in learning more about the changes related to LEAPs, we really encourage you to watch the recording of our previous session on the state of after school in New York. I'm going to drop a link in the chat again to that one as well, just because that gives you a really wide breadth of how LEAPs changed the landscape, what it looks like, what we can expect to see, and all of those pieces that we know that legislators are currently concerned with. So regarding LEAPs, legislators want to see after-school providers that the Office for Children and Family Services identified as approved but not funded in the RFP process. They want to see those programs funded. This would require additional funding directly to the LEAPs program. The most common response we've heard from legislators is also concern that LEAPs does not support middle and high school age young people. There's a significant interest from legislators to secure additional funding to ensure young people over the age of 13 are able to access state-funded programs as well. So it's kind of twofold. They're interested in funding those programs that were deemed eligible by OCFS but not funded, and to fill that gap. And they're also interested in providing services to that age group that are over the age of 13 that LEAPs does not cover. We also know that there are new legislators starting this year that are completely unfamiliar with the after-school landscape in New York. There's really an opportunity for us as the network to inform them and build new after-school champions, so folks who are interested in after-school. The needs and interests of the legislature are often a little more varied than the governor just because they represent a smaller number of New Yorkers. So we tend to see folks interested in what they can do for their districts as opposed to the entirety of the state. We know that despite that, we know there's significant interest in strengthening the system for after school that we currently have and expanding access to more young people across New York State. So that's the legislators really focus on. So we know that it's a busy time for many of us. As we mentioned, the governor's executive budget is happening right now. It's just a lot of things going on, especially if you're in the advocacy space. We want to acknowledge that, but we also want to give you some actionable steps as the budget season continues. So it's really important for us to keep the word up on social media using the hashtag #EmpowerYouthSuccess. I'll drop that in the chat as well so that you have it on the slide, in the chat, and also me verbally saying it. Here it is. But really, we want to keep that conversation up. We want to keep awareness up. If you are posting about social media, you can use the tag and also tag your legislator just so show them that after school is important to their constituents. Like, they're going to respond to what they hear that their constituents care about, what they hear about from folks in their communities. They want to know what's going on the ground. So this is a really easy and low lift way to do that. We also hope that you schedule meetings with your state representatives. These can be virtual or in their district offices. You can meet to share about your program and invite families and youth to come and talk about their experiences in after school. So virtual and in-district meetings can be really accessible because they're right in the community, or if they're virtual, you don't even have to go anywhere. So we really encourage you to try to prepare and invite youth and family to join those spaces just to share about what after school means to them and what's important about it to them with their legislator. So when meeting with legislators, we encourage you to use the Power of Three key messaging as a starting point. These are the 3 core talking points that we use about after school. They are as follows. After school keeps children and youth safe after the traditional school day ends. It supports academic achievement and development and helps caregivers balance work and family life. These aren't talking points that are hard and fast rules. We're not saying you have to say these. If you don't say these, you're not doing it right. Not at all. It's just a grounding space or a way for us to, again, bring that conversation back to the youth and families that are impacted by our programs and in our communities. So it's just a helpful tool to guide your conversation. If you're really not sure what to talk about, you come back to one of these points and say, like, how does your program do one of these things, right? How does it keep children safe? How does it support academic achievement? What does that look like? So we've talked a lot today about after-school budget priorities that the network has shared with decision makers. We've shared it with them. We want to take some time to review it also with you. So our first and most prominent ask is for the state to allocate $180 million to enhance and expand the LEAPS grant. A majority of that ask, $155 million of it, is to support after-school programs that applied for the LEAPS grant, were deemed eligible and high quality by the state, but were unable to receive funding due to a lack of available funding for the grants. The second part of this priority is $25 million to restore after-school access to middle and high school students. This funding would address the gap in services that the state previously provided before the implementation of LEAPS and implementing its age limit of 12 years old. After school is important for the development of middle and high school age young people as it provides a safe space to explore their interests and build relationships with caring adults. The network is also asking the state to dedicate $5 million to support school-age childcare and after-school quality support through the Network for Youth Success as a statewide after-school network. This would support technical assistance for the after-school field to increase the capacity and quality of after-school statewide and expand professional development opportunities and strengthen capacity building efforts. This funding would ensure that after-school programs across New York are able to maintain high-quality services for families in their communities. The network is also working with partners interested in supporting the childcare system at the state level and prioritizing additional funding for the childcare workforce. Many childcare advocates, including the Network for Youth Success, are asking for $1.2 billion to establish a permanent childcare workforce compensation fund. This fund would help after-school providers address persistent staffing challenges by increasing compensation for the childcare workforce, which includes after-school professionals working in school-age childcare programs. This is long overdue as an investment in the workforce, and we know that we will have major impacts on the well-being of families across the state. The network's final budget priorities does not include a dollar amount that's attached to it. However, we know that school community partnerships are important and necessary for providing effective and efficient after-school programming. A collaborative approach between school districts and community-based organizations often results in the best overall outcomes for students. To help support this collaboration, the network is proposing that agencies administering after-school grants create a unified policy and implementation framework to strengthen partnerships between both parties. These budget priorities aim to address the current challenges that we know the after-school field is facing, while also working to build structures that make the after-school system more efficient, effective, and responsive in New York State. We're going to add the full after-school budget priorities in the chat for your reference, so you don't have to try to remember all the stuff we just said. I'm dropping that in the chat as well, but please check that out. Use it as a building block or an understanding about what we're asking for. Really just review it if you're curious. So to close out today, we want to share some resources for your reference. As I've mentioned before already, I'm going to say it again. We encourage you to sign up for our Power 3 listserv. So we'll give you weekly updates on after-school advocacy opportunities, information about opportunities, but also the current going-ons at the state level, at the federal level around after-school. And we'll give you an opportunity to inform the budget priorities we just discussed next year. So if you are interested in being part of that conversation, please sign up, check it out. We send them once a week. They have a lot of good information in them. You can also check out our other advocacy trainings. As I mentioned before, we have general trainings on a range of topics related to after-school advocacy that are free to watch. We're going to be hosting another session coming up here during the budget season. More information on that to come. That'll be added to the Power 3 listserv as well. So here is a link to that webpage once more. Lots of resources in the chat box today. We also invite you to explore our regional networks for a more local focus. So if you're interested in joining a regional network, please reach out to me and I can work on connecting you. We also welcome you to share highlights, including photos, testimonials, or videos from your programs that we could use in advocacy efforts. These are always really helpful. Legislators love to see what's actually going on the ground. So photos, videos, stuff like that is wonderful. Again, testimonials, especially if they're from your youth and families and they just want to talk about how much they love their after school program. We love that. Let me drop a link to those things in the chat box as well. And the final slide, or one of the final slides that we have, just has some resources for your reference. I'll follow up after this webinar with the slide deck, so you'll have access to this. You can click through it just for you to reference back to. And with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today and leave some space for questions. So I can stay on for a little while to answer any questions folks might have. But other than that, that concludes our session for today. I really appreciate you all joining us.